The wind carried dust across the hard pan like smoke, low and slow, dragging the morning light with it. The fence line stretched thin across the land. Crooked posts, rusted wire, bone white from years of sun. Sagebrush leaned into the breeze like it was listening. He saw her before the crows did, a small shape, still against the wooden slats, legs buckled, head hung low. Her hair was matted to her back with dust and sweat, the color of river mud. Rope bit into her wrists, raw and red against skin too pale. She hadn't moved. Not once. The rancher didn't speak, just stopped his horse 10 yards out. Watched, waited, as if making sure she was real. The girl looked no older than 16. Her dress was torn where the wind had worried it. No shoes, no hat, just skin and silence. He dismounted slowly, the saddle leather creaking louder than the wind. His boots hit the ground with a dull thud. One step, then another. She didn't flinch. There was a note pinned to the fence post, a nail driven through folded paper, stained at the edges with something brown. He didn't read it, just stared at the hammer mark in the wood. It had been driven in hard, like someone angry or scared. The girl lifted her head, not fast, just enough for him to see her eyes. Not pleading, not broken, just waiting. He cut the rope. She didn't fall, only leaned, then stood, legs trembling like a colt's first walk. She didn't thank him, didn't cry. He didn't ask. They just stood, surrounded by the great nowhere. Behind them, the sky turned a deeper blue, a storm forming, far off. He turned to his horse. She followed. The wind shifted again, this time colder, and the crows circled in behind them, too late. They walked side by side, but not together. The girl stayed behind his left shoulder, limping slightly. One hand held the torn hem of her dress. The other, still marked by rope, hung stiff and useless. Dust clung to her skin like a second coat. She didn't look around, didn't ask where they were going. She just walked, like someone who'd followed men before and knew not to speak. The rancher said nothing. His horse trailed loosely behind, reins dragging in the dirt. It knew the way. He didn't lead it. He didn't look at her. But he could feel her, the weight of her silence, the rhythm of her breath, the way she stopped every time he did, half a beat late. They passed a broken cattle trough, a dead crow by the edge, one wing raised to the sky like it had tried to beg. The girl didn't flinch. She had seen worse. The house came into view slow, a single shape rising from the flatness, made of weathered boards and rusted tin. The porch sagged. One shutter banged loosely in the wind. No smoke from the chimney. No dogs, no voices. It didn't look like a place for a girl. He didn't stop, just walked up the steps, pushed the door open with his boot, and stepped aside. She hesitated, just for a second, then crossed the threshold like someone walking into church, head low, feet soft, not sure if she belonged. Inside, it smelled of dry wood, iron, and old coffee. There was no warmth in the room, just the crackle of dust settling and the ticking of a broken clock that hadn't moved in years. He dropped his hat on the hook, took off his coat. She stood by the door, still barefoot, still silent, arms wrapped around herself like a coat she didn't have. He opened a cupboard, took out a tin cup, poured water from a dented kettle, placed it on the table, didn't gesture, didn't look back. She approached slowly. Saturday held the cup in both hands. Steam rose into her face, softening the dried blood on her lip. Only then did he finally sit down across from her, and for a long minute, the two of them just breathed. Outside, a windmill creaked once and stilled. Something had shifted. The sky was the color of ash when he stepped out. The girl was still asleep, curled on top of the covers like a stray cat, boots beside the bed, palms turned up. He hadn't asked her name. She hadn't offered it. Cold settled over the porch like breath held too long. He moved without sound, down the steps, past the watering trough, through the brittle grass that cracked under his boots. His hand brushed the butt of the Colt at his hip, not out of habit, but something older, something bone deep. Then he saw it, on the fence where she'd first been tied. The same post, same nail. Something new now hung there. Not a letter, not a threat. A ragged strip of her dress, torn, tied into a knot. It hadn't been there yesterday. The rope he'd cut lay coiled beneath it like a snake shedding its skin, dry, undisturbed. But the knot was fresh, too clean, too intentional. Someone had come back, not to rescue, not to kill, just to mark, to say, she was mine, and I know where she is. He stood still for a long time, staring. The fence groaned in the wind. Somewhere a crow called out, sharp and lonely. He didn't untie the cloth, didn't touch the rope, just turned, slow, and walked back toward the house. Each step heavier than the last. Inside, the girl was awake now, sitting at the table, same chair as last night, hands folded, staring at the door. She didn't ask. He didn't tell. But something between them stiffened, like wood swelling before it splits. And outside, the knot on the fence fluttered in the wind, waiting. He told her nothing before leaving. Just saddled the horse, packed the saddlebag, checked the cinch, and looked once through the cracked window to where she stood at the stove, motionless. Then he was gone. Dust lifted behind him in a long, quiet line. The house swallowed the silence he left behind. She moved only when she could no longer hear the hooves, lit the fire again, swept the porch, sat at the edge of the steps like a scarecrow in a dress too big, her hands curled in her lap like forgotten tools. The wind tugged at her hair. The chickens watched her from under the wagon with dark, dumb eyes. Everything waited. Inside, the rifle stood against the doorframe, loaded, polished. He had left it there without a word. By afternoon, the stillness changed. It wasn't louder, just closer. The fly buzzing at the window wouldn't leave. The floor creaked behind her once, just once, but there was no one there. She checked every room, opened every cabinet, nothing. And still the feeling, not fear, not yet, but the sense that something out there had leaned closer. She tried to sleep before sunset, but the bed was too clean, too cold. She lay still, eyes open, and stared at the wood grain in the ceiling, following its lines like roads that went nowhere. Then, a thump on the porch. She sat up, not wind, a footstep, slow, careful, right above the third plank, the one that gave. The rifle was 5 steps away. She moved like a deer learning to walk again. No sound, no breath. Fingers curling around the stock, holding it wrong, too tight, too close. Another sound now, not wood, a fingernail across the window pane. Once, like someone tracing her name in the dust. Then silence, long, hungry, not even the wind. She waited there until morning, knees to chest, rifle across her lap, listening. At sunrise, the door still hadn't moved, but the knot on the fence was gone. He came back before noon, quiet, wordless. The horse was lathered, saddle dusted. He dismounted at the porch, ears tuned to something silent, as if the house itself had asked what he'd seen. He didn't answer, just climbed the steps and opened the door. Slow, careful, like someone entering a room he no longer trusted. She was at the table, hands beneath the cloth, back straight. He looked at her, then at the floor beneath the window. The dust there held prints that weren't his, bare feet, small, not hers. He said nothing, neither did she, but her silence was different now, not fragile, not afraid, still. He set down the supplies, opened the cupboard, checked the latch, poured water into a tin cup, drank. Each motion quiet, precise, and all the while he smelled something. Not her, not sweat or smoke or horse. Something foreign, not filth, but presence. Something that had stood inside this room and wanted something. When the sun fell behind the barn, he stepped outside. On the fence, something fluttered. Not cloth, a feather, black, stiff, wedged between 2 boards. Crowtail, old, dry, planted like a flag. He pulled it free, held it in his fingers for a long while. Behind him, in the house, she stood at the window, watching him not throw it away, watching how still he stood, as if he was waiting, as if he already knew he wouldn't have to wait long. That night the wind didn't howl. It whispered. Long threads of sound slipped through the gaps in the walls, brushing against beams and floorboards like something testing the house for weakness. He didn't sleep. Sat in the rocker near the cold stove, shotgun resting upright beside his knee. One oil lamp burned low, flickering in the draft. Shadows climbed the walls in slow, nervous shapes. She slept in the back room, or pretended to. The silence between them had grown heavier, not colder, as if each was waiting for the other to say the thing they both already knew. Something had been here, and it would be back. Around midnight, the wind changed. Less restless, more deliberate. Then the floor creaked. Not inside. Outside. He stood without a sound. Bare feet, soft tread. Moved to the window like a man who'd done this before. He didn't lift the curtain, just leaned into the dark. Nothing. But he felt it. A presence close to the door. Not knocking. Waiting. He stepped back, raised the shotgun. Not to fire. Just held it like a warning. Minutes passed. Then, a small scrape. At the base of the door. He waited until it stopped. Then longer. Only then did he open it. Nothing but moonlight and wind. But on the porch, a piece of twine. Frayed. Cut at the end. With something small tied to it. A child's button. Faded pink. He looked out into the dark. No figures. No prints. Just the sense of eyes. Somewhere in the pasture. Behind the cottonwoods. Watching. He picked up the twine. Closed the door. Locked it. Sat back down. The feather was still on the shelf. Now beside it, he set the button. Neither of them spoke of it in the morning, but she looked at the button once, then turned her face to the window, her fingers pressed tight to the sill. And he knew, whoever had tied her to that fence, he wasn't done. Not with her, and now, not with him. Chapter 7. He found the old tin box beneath a loose plank in the barn. Not searching, just reaching for a coil of rope, and his hand brushed the edge. Dusty, dented, cold. He sat on the feed sack, opened it slowly. Inside, a handful of things that hadn't seen daylight in years. A folded letter, never sent. A brass coin worn smooth, and a photograph. Small, curled at the corners. 3 faces. One was his, younger, unbroken. The second, a woman with storm-dark eyes. The third, a man in uniform, smiling in a way that didn't match his eyes. He stared at that last face for a long time. The wind shifted outside. Horses moved in their stalls. He didn't flinch, just closed the box, slid it back beneath the floor. Later, as he chopped kindling near the porch, the girl stepped outside, barefoot, hair unbraided, holding a cup of water with both hands like it was something breakable. He glanced up. Their eyes met. Something passed between them. Not a question, not an answer. Just recognition. Of silence. Of damage. He nodded toward the rail. She sat, quiet, still, watching the trees. He lit a cigarette. Let it burn low. Flicked the ash into the dust. Then she said it. Soft, almost not at all. He had a brother. The words dropped like a stone into water. Ripples didn't show right away, but they would. He looked away, toward the barn, toward the place where the box waited. And for the first time in weeks, the air felt thick, not just with dust or heat, but with memory. The night settled thick over the ranch like wool soaked in creek water. The fire in the hearth cracked quietly, more for company than for heat. She sat on the floor near the flames, knees drawn up, staring into the orange light like it could burn the past off her skin. He sat at the table with a knife and a block of wood, carving nothing in particular, just moving his hands to keep from remembering. Outside, the wind had gone still, but the dogs wouldn't settle. They circled the yard once, twice, then stood facing the tree line, tails low. He noticed but didn't rise. Not yet. Inside the room, the only sounds were the knife against wood, the low breathing of the fire, and the occasional crack of something shifting in the walls. Then she spoke again, quiet, like testing the silence. He told me no one would take me. Her voice didn't shake. It was a plain fact, like a fence post splitting in winter. Said I wasn't worth trading for a goat. He didn't answer, didn't move. just placed the piece of wood down and looked at her hands. They were wrapped tight around her elbows. Bruises on her wrists faded to yellow now, old damage, sinking into the skin like roots. He stood, crossed to the shelf, poured a second cup of coffee, set it near her without a word. She didn't touch it, just nodded. That was enough. Outside, the dogs stopped growling. One gave a single bark, then silence. He stepped to the door, cracked it open. Cold air poured in. Nothing moved. Not in the yard, not in the trees, but in the dust just beyond the porch, he saw it. A shape in the dirt. A boot print. Fresh. Too small for his. Too big for hers. He closed the door, locked it, walked back to the fire and sat down. The girl hadn't turned her head, but her eyes were watching him in the glass reflection of the window. Neither of them spoke again that night. By morning, the print was gone, swallowed by wind or hoof, but he remembered exactly where it had been. He saddled the gelding without a sound, left before she woke. The trail led down past the dead cottonwoods and the old well that hadn't held water in 5 years. Everything out there looked the same, but something felt different, like the land was holding its breath. He dismounted near the dry creek bed, tied the reins to a post that shouldn't have still been standing. Just a rotted cross of wood, weather split and leaning. He knelt. The soil had been stirred. Not a camp, not a grave. Just someone standing there waiting, watching. He rose slow, looked up at the ridge. Nothing. No movement. No sound but wind against stone. Then he heard it. A bird call, wrong for the season. Too sharp, too placed. He didn't reach for the rifle slung across his back. He just stood there, letting the cold soak into his bones, letting the air tell him what it could. After a long minute, he turned back toward the horse, but paused. A shape caught his eye beneath a rock ledge. A strip of cloth, sun-faded blue. Torn. Could have been from a shirt. Could have been from the past. He didn't touch it, just looked at it, long and flat, like a question. Then he rode home. When he reached the ranch, she was on the porch, arms wrapped around herself. She didn't ask where he'd been. He didn't tell her. But when he stepped inside, he noticed the coffee was still warm, and the shotgun had been moved closer to the door. He oiled the rifle that evening without a word, the way a man might sharpen a blade not for war, but because steel left dull too long begins to forget its purpose. She watched from the table, silent, her hands wrapped around the same cold cup for over an hour. The air outside was too still, the kind of stillness that comes before dust rises. He moved slower now, more deliberate, as if the floorboards might speak if he stepped too hard. Before he left the room, he opened the old trunk by the hearth and pulled out a second rifle, one with a crack in the stock and a faded strap. He set it on the table near her without looking directly at her. "If someone rides up, and I'm not the one on the horse," he said, voice flat, "aim low and breathe steady." Then he walked out into the dusk. She didn't answer, didn't touch the gun, just stared at it like it was some wild thing left in the room to test her. Behind her, the fire kept burning, but the warmth didn't move past her shoulders. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried, too late in the day to be hunting. The dogs didn't move. The wind didn't come. The rifle on the table waited. That night she couldn't sleep. The wind had shifted, warmer now, but restless, like something out there was circling wide before closing in. Floorboards creaked under her bare feet as she stepped into the kitchen, the lamp still burning low. His coat was gone from the hook. The door had been shut, but not latched. Outside, the moon laid a pale track across the yard, and the corral fence stood empty, the horses gone or hidden deep in the trees. She stepped onto the porch and waited. It was a long time before she saw anything, and even then, it came slow. Just a shape on the rise, hunched and walking. No horse, no light, just the shape of a man with something dragging behind him. She didn't run, didn't call, just stood there with her hand on the post like holding still would keep the world from cracking open. When he finally came into the yard, she saw it wasn't him. Too thin, too slow, and behind him, caught in the moonlight, was a length of rope, trailing like a tail. Her heart knocked once, hard. The dogs growled but didn't bark. She stepped back into the house, shut the door without a sound, and reached for the rifle. The lamp trembled on the table. The rope dragged closer. Someone knocked, just once. She didn't open the door, not right away. The knock came again, slower this time, heavier, then silence. She moved through the room quiet as dust, barefoot on old floorboards, the rifle gripped tight against her chest. No shadows under the door, no footsteps on the porch, just wind, brushing against the walls like fingers. She stood there for what felt like hours. Then, a voice, low, drawn out, like someone trying not to sound like themselves. "Girl, you in there?" Her breath caught. She knew that voice. Not from here, not from now, from before. She stepped back, one step, then two, sat on the floor behind the table, heart shaking in her ribs like something caged. Outside, nothing moved, but the voice came again. "I said I'd come back." He returned at dawn, dust on his coat, blood dried across one sleeve. The dogs didn't bark. They only watched, ears low, as he came up the steps. She was already at the stove, her eyes fixed on the iron pan, though nothing cooked in it. She didn't ask where he'd been. He set the rifle on the table. His face was gray with sleeplessness, eyes raw and sunken. She noticed his hands were shaking slightly as he reached for a mug. Coffee grounds scattered across the counter like ash. Through the window, the sky was pale and open. Still, nothing moved out there, but the silence felt too deep, like it was waiting for something. He finally spoke, voice low. "He won't come again." That was all. She didn't answer. Just nodded once, slowly, and walked to the back room. He watched her go, then sat down in the empty chair across from the cold stove. His breath was heavy, not from the ride, from everything else. The wind picked up around the corners of the house. Not sharp, just tired, like it had been blowing a long time and was finally giving in. That evening, she fed the horses alone. The barn was quiet except for the creak of wood and the slow stomp of hooves. Dust floated in the air like memory. She moved carefully as if the ground beneath her might break. Out by the fence line, he stood with a lantern, checking the wire, watching the tree line. The same place where they'd found her rope months ago, the same crooked post. Nothing had changed there, except her. Inside the house, the table had been set for two. The plates were chipped but clean. A loaf of bread sat untouched between them. He didn't come in right away. He stayed by the fence long after the lantern went out. When he finally stepped through the door, the fire had burned low, and she was sitting in the chair he usually took. Her boots were by the hearth. Her coat still hung on the peg, but her eyes didn't look like they had before. He nodded once and sat across from her. Neither spoke, but something between them had settled, like dust on still water. Not peace, not yet, but something close. Snow came late that year, thin at first, then heavier, laying quiet across the empty hills. The fields turned white overnight. Fence posts disappeared one by one beneath it. The cattle didn't move much. Neither did the world. He packed the wagon slowly. No hurry, just rope, flour, a rifle under the tarp. She brought out the last bundle, blankets tied in oilcloth. He didn't ask what she'd packed. She didn't say. They stood for a long time under the porch roof, watching the snow fall in sideways lines. The wind had no edge to it now. Just weight, just silence. He climbed up first, gloves stiff from the cold, then turned to help her. She took his hand. It was the first time. The road east was narrow and half buried, but clear enough to follow. The horses moved slow, steady. The house behind them didn't shrink in the distance. It just faded, like something swallowed by time. Neither looked back. By sundown, they reached the ridge. Below them, the valley opened wide, pale and endless. Somewhere in that quiet space, the past let go. He didn't speak. She didn't need him to. They kept riding, and the snow kept falling.